Beneath the surface of southern Siberia, buried under a sky that burns violet in winter and blazes gold in summer, lies a body of water so ancient and so profound that it defies every ordinary measure we use to understand lakes. Lake Baikal holds more fresh water than all 5 of North America's Great Lakes combined, roughly 20% of the world's entire liquid freshwater supply, locked inside a single, cathedral-shaped rift in the Earth's crust. It plunges to a verified depth of 1,642 meters, over a mile straight down, making it not just the deepest lake on the planet, but one of the deepest natural features of any kind found on land. What makes Baikal extraordinary beyond raw numbers is its age. This lake is somewhere between 25 and 30 million years old, making it the most ancient lake in existence, a body of water that was already ancient when the first hominids were learning to walk. Most lakes are geologically temporary. They silt up, drain away, or get swallowed by shifting land within a few million years, but Baikal sits atop an active continental rift that is still slowly tearing apart, deepening the lake even as we speak. The rift itself descends another 7 kilometers below the lake floor, filled with sediment that has been accumulating since the Oligocene epoch, layer upon layer of geological memory stretching down like the pages of a book no human will ever fully read. From above, Baikal stretches nearly 640 kilometers from tip to tip, roughly the length of the entire country of Belgium, yet it is so narrow in places that you could mistake it for a vast, inland sea caught between mountain walls. The Barguzin and Baikal mountain ranges press in from either shore like stone sentinels, their peaks dusted with snow for most of the year, channeling ferocious Siberian winds across the water's surface into something the locals call the sarma, gusts that can exceed 40 meters per second. In winter, Baikal freezes into a sheet of ice so clear and so thick, up to 2 meters deep, that you can stand on it and look straight down into blue darkness below your feet, watching shadows move in the cold silence beneath you. And in those cold, dark, oxygen-rich depths below, in a world most lakes could never sustain, life has been evolving in total isolation for tens of millions of years, producing creatures found absolutely nowhere else on Earth. Those creatures begin with something almost impossibly small, the episkora, a tiny crustacean no bigger than a grain of rice, yet responsible for filtering nearly all of Baikal's water, consuming algae and bacteria with relentless efficiency across the entire lake. There are trillions of them, drifting in vast invisible clouds through the cold, and without them, Baikal's legendary clarity, that window into blue nothingness, would simply cease to exist. Then there is the omul, a silver-flanked fish found only in these waters, so deeply embedded in the culture of Siberia that locals speak of it the way others speak of bread, as something elemental, inseparable from life itself. Smoked over cedar wood on the shores of the lake, it tastes of cold water in ancient time, and it swims in schools so dense they darken the water like moving storm clouds beneath the surface. But the creature that stops every scientist cold, the one that rewrites assumptions about where warm-blooded animals can thrive, is the Baikal seal, the nerpa, the only freshwater seal on the planet, living thousands of kilometers from any ocean. No one is entirely certain how it got here, whether it migrated along ancient river systems during a distant ice age, or whether Baikal itself was once connected to something vast and now forgotten. The nerpa pups are born white as fresh snow directly on the frozen surface of the lake in late winter, perfectly camouflaged against a world that is itself white and silent and seemingly endless. They nurse under that freezing sky for just a few weeks before the ice begins to break, and then they are left to learn the lake, a body of water so deep it takes a stone several minutes to reach the bottom. Deep below the nerpa's diving range, in the lightless zones where pressure builds and temperature drops toward freezing, something even stranger has taken hold: sponges, ancient and enormous, growing in forests across the lakebed in colors that should not exist in darkness: vivid orange, electric green, deep purple. They filter the water as it passes through them, and some of these sponge colonies have been growing in place for hundreds of years, slow and patient and utterly alien. Scientists lowering cameras into Baikal's deepest trenches have captured footage that looks less like a lake and more like a scene from deep ocean exploration: pale amphipods swarming over the sediment, transparent shrimp drifting through the frame, and the occasional flash of something larger retreating just beyond the edge of the light. The sheer diversity of life concentrated in this single landlocked basin has led biologists to call it the Galapagos of Russia, a place where evolution ran its own uninterrupted experiment for longer than most mountain ranges have existed. What makes Baikal's biological isolation so extraordinary is the age of that separation. These species did not diverge over thousands of years but over tens of millions, meaning the genetic distance between a Baikal amphipod and its closest relatives elsewhere on Earth is staggering, more comparable to the difference between a shark and a salmon than anything you might expect from a freshwater ecosystem. Evolution here did not just branch, it exploded, filling every available niche with a specialized creature shaped for exactly this lake and no other. The water itself plays a role no other lake on Earth can replicate. Baikal is so deep and its circulation so powerful that cold, oxygen-rich water moves constantly from surface to floor, meaning even the deepest zones are not the stagnant, oxygen-depleted dead zones you find at the bottom of most lakes. This single fact, that the depths breathe, is what allowed complex animal life to colonize every layer of this lake, from the ice above to the hydrothermal vents below. Yes, hydrothermal vents, discovered on Baikal's floor decades after scientists assumed such features belonged only to the ocean, releasing warm, mineral-rich water into the cold dark and creating localized hotspots of biological activity that feel impossibly out of place in a landlocked Siberian lake. Around these vents, communities of organisms thrive in conditions that would kill most freshwater life, drawing energy not from sunlight filtering down through thousands of meters of water but from the chemical heat of the Earth itself. Above all of this, above the vents, above the sponge forests, above the Nerpa and the Omel and the invisible clouds of Episkura, the lake holds its surface stillness with the composure of something that has seen millennia pass like seasons. You can stand on its shore and hear almost nothing, just the soft pressure of the wind moving across an expanse of water so vast and so old it seems less like a lake and more like the Earth's own memory of itself. And yet, for all its ancient composure, Baikal is not static, it breathes, it shifts, it evolves in real time. And one of its most astonishing qualities is that it continues to surprise the very scientists who have dedicated entire careers to its study, revealing secrets layer by layer like pages of a book that never quite ends. The water itself is part of the mystery. Baikal's clarity is so extreme that visibility can extend to 40 meters deep, making it one of the most transparent bodies of water on the planet. A quality born not from emptiness but from the relentless biological filtration performed by those billions of Episkura crustaceans working in constant, invisible motion. This transparency means light penetrates deeper here than in almost any other freshwater system on Earth, pushing photosynthetic life further down into the water column than should be physically possible. And scientists have found algae growing at depths that would be considered lightless in any other lake, rewriting the assumed boundaries of where life can anchor itself. This tectonic restlessness is why the lake floor is so extraordinarily deep, up to 1,642 meters at its lowest measured point, and why Baikal experiences thousands of small earthquakes annually, most imperceptible to humans standing on its shore but felt in the sediment layers, a constant geological hum running beneath everything that lives and dies in its waters. That sediment itself is a scientific treasure almost without parallel. In some regions of the lake floor, layers of accumulated material stretch down nearly 8 kilometers, representing an unbroken geological record of climate, eruption, ice age, and ecological change stretching back tens of millions of years, a library written not in words but in silt and organic matter and mineral compression. Drilling into those sediment cores, researchers have extracted records of ancient climates that predate the existence of modern humans entirely, evidence of how the Siberian landscape transformed through ice ages and warming periods, written in microscopic fossils of organisms that no longer exist and chemical signatures that correspond to specific atmospheric conditions lost to time. What makes all of this even more staggering is that Baikal is still forming. The rift continues to pull, the lake continues to deepen, and scientists project that given enough geological time, this inland sea may one day connect to the ocean, splitting the Asian continent and becoming something that doesn't yet have a name in any human geography we currently know. Standing at its edge in winter, when the surface locks into ice sheets up to 2 meters thick and the cold descends with a weight that seems personal, you become aware that you are standing on a living geological event. The ice groans and cracks with a sound like distant thunder, releasing tones that travel for kilometers across the frozen surface in an eerie, cathedral resonance. Those winter ice sounds, locals have listened to them for centuries, some calling them the voice of the lake, carry within them something that science can explain but not fully demystify. The acoustic signature of a body of water so vast and so structurally complex that even its freezing becomes a spectacle, a reminder that Baikal operates on a scale that belongs less to nature as we casually define it and more to the deep, unhurried architecture of the earth itself. And when spring finally loosens Baikal's grip, when those 2-meter plates of ice begin to fracture and drift, catching the low Siberian sun in shards of blue and white light, the lake does not simply thaw, it performs a slow, grinding resurrection that can take weeks, the surface transforming into a mosaic of pressure ridges and open leads before surrendering entirely to liquid again. Beneath that retreating ice, something remarkable waits, an ecosystem that has been evolving in near-total isolation for 25 million years, longer than the Alps have existed, longer than the Sahara has been desert. A biological laboratory sealed by geography and fed by the lake's extraordinary oxygen saturation, which runs deep enough to sustain life at depths that would be dead zones anywhere else on Earth. That oxygen richness is not accidental. Baikal's extraordinary depth, reaching 1,642 meters at its lowest measured point, combined with powerful convection currents that cycle water from surface to abyss, creates a vertical circulation unlike almost any other freshwater system, delivering breathable water to creatures living in permanent darkness nearly 1.5 miles below the surface. Among the most emblematic of Baikal's residents is the Nerpa, the world's only exclusively freshwater seal, a compact, silver-gray animal whose ancestors somehow colonized this landlocked lake, likely following ancient river corridors from the Arctic Ocean during geological epochs when the geography of northern Asia looked nothing like it does today, leaving biologists still debating the precise route of that extraordinary migration. The Nerpa's eyes are disproportionately large, an evolutionary adaptation to hunting in Baikal's deep, light-starved water column, and watching one surface through a breathing hole in the winter ice, its dark gaze momentarily catching yours before it disappears back into that black interior, is one of those encounters that rearranges something quietly inside you, a reminder that intelligence and curiosity are not exclusively human inventions. Far deeper, in zones where sunlight has never reached, lives the Gallomyanka, a nearly translucent fish so saturated with fat that it is effectively see-through, its organs faintly visible through its body. A creature so adapted to pressure and cold that when brought to the surface it simply dissolves in the warmth, leaving behind little more than an oily residue and a sense that some animals were built for worlds we were never meant to access. Baikal's endemic species number over 3,600, roughly 80% of its animal life exists nowhere else on the planet, a statistic that sounds clean until you begin to understand what it means. That this single body of water holds within it evolutionary lineages as distinct and irreplaceable as those found on island archipelagos like the Galapagos, making its protection not merely a regional concern but a matter of planetary biological heritage. The lake's floor is not static. Baikal sits atop the Baikal Rift Zone, one of the most seismically active continental rifts on Earth, still widening at roughly 2 centimeters per year, its basin deepening imperceptibly with each passing century, meaning the lake is not a finished feature of the landscape but an ongoing process, a wound in the crust that the planet continues to open with the patience of geological time. Hydrothermal vents punctuate that rifting floor, releasing warm, mineral-rich water into the cold abyss, and around these vents flourish communities of organisms that draw their energy not from sunlight but from chemical reactions in the rock itself. Chemosynthetic ecosystems that mirror what scientists believe may exist beneath the ice-covered oceans of Europa or Enceladus, making Baikal not just a record of Earth's past but a living preview of what life might look like across the solar system. These chemosynthetic communities are not mere curiosities, they are proof that life requires no star to survive, no warmth from above, only chemistry and time, and Baikal offers them both in abundance. Its rifting floor a laboratory where the rules of biology are quietly, persistently rewritten. Rising from that dark foundation, the water column itself becomes a living archive, layered with distinct thermal zones that rarely mix, trapping ancient water near the bottom in near-perfect isolation for decades at a time, preserving a chemical signature closer to primordial ocean than anything on the modern surface of Earth. Yet oxygen persists even at these crushing depths, an anomaly that baffles scientists who study other ancient lakes, where the abyss typically suffocates in anoxic shadow, and Baikal's secret is the Baikal seal, the Nerpa, the only exclusively freshwater seal on the planet, whose diving and surfacing behavior helps churn the water column in ways that keep the deep oxygenated and alive. The Nerpa is an evolutionary riddle wrapped in pale fur, its nearest genetic relatives living thousands of kilometers away in the Arctic, suggesting its ancestors somehow made an impossible inland journey during an ice age when river systems connected oceans to Siberia's interior, marooning a population that would spend millions of years becoming something entirely its own. Beneath its whiskered face and oil-dark eyes, the Nerpa has adapted lungs of extraordinary capacity, capable of sustaining dives that would leave most mammals unconscious, its body metabolizing oxygen with a slow efficiency that reads more like a machine than an animal, shaped by Baikal's demands into a creature of almost mechanical precision. The lake also holds the Golomayanka, a nearly transparent fish with no swim bladder, no scales, and a body so saturated with fat that early Siberian peoples rendered it for lamp oil, a creature so specialized for pressure and darkness that it dissolves almost entirely when brought to the surface and exposed to warmth, vanishing like a ghost the moment the world above tries to examine it. More than 80% of Baikal's animal species exist nowhere else on Earth, a statistic that sounds like poetry but lands with the weight of scientific fact, meaning the lake functions less like a body of water and more like an island, its geographic isolation and extreme age conspiring to turn every organism inside it into a unique evolutionary experiment. The Baikal sponge, growing in vast golden and green gardens across the shallows, filters the entire lake's water so efficiently that scientists estimate these organisms are partly responsible for Baikal's legendary clarity. Water so transparent that sunlight penetrates 40 meters deep, illuminating a world that feels less like a lake and more like the interior of a gemstone. That clarity is both wonder and warning, because Baikal's ecological balance is fragile in ways that its sheer size obscures: industrial pollution, warming temperatures, and the proliferation of the algae Spirogyra across once pristine shores signal a system under stress, its ancient equilibrium nudged by a century of human activity in ways the lake's geology will take millennia to undo. And yet Baikal endures with a patience that makes human timescales feel almost laughable. It held its secrets through ice ages, through the rise and fall of civilizations, through the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway along its southern shore, carrying its impossible cargo of ancient water and stranger life forward through time like a message written in a language we are only beginning to learn to read. That patience is mirrored in the lake's most extraordinary inhabitants, creatures so thoroughly shaped by Baikal's isolation that they exist nowhere else on Earth, living fossils and evolutionary marvels locked inside a single body of water, as if the lake itself chose to run its own private experiment in what life could become given enough time and enough depth. Chief among them is the Nerpa, the world's only exclusively freshwater seal, a small and somehow deeply melancholy creature whose ancestors arrived here millions of years ago through river systems long since vanished, adapting so completely to Baikal's cold that their pups are born white against the winter ice, invisible to predators in a landscape of pure unbroken white. The Nerpa can dive to extraordinary depths, holding its breath for over an hour and descending past 70 meters into water so cold and dark it presses against the body like a physical weight. Yet they move through it with the effortless grace of something that has never known any other world, their enormous dark eyes built to gather the faintest traces of light from below. Beneath them, in the deep water columns that sunlight never reaches, swims the Golomayanka, a nearly transparent fish with no scales and a body so saturated in fat that it dissolves almost entirely when brought into air, as if it were a creature made not of flesh but of the lake's own cold pressure, something the deep invented and refused to share with the surface. The Golomayanka bears live young rather than laying eggs, a rarity among fish, and reproduces in such extraordinary numbers that it forms one of the largest biomasses in the entire lake system, Perhaps the most important link in a food chain that stretches from microscopic algae drifting in the darkness all the way up to the NERPA circling far above. Then there are the amphipods, tiny crustaceans that carpet the lake floor in staggering diversity, over 250 species found nowhere else, some of them scavengers that clean the depths with mechanical efficiency, others translucent and ghostly, drifting through midwater like living fragments of the lake's own cold light filtered down from a world they have never seen. These creatures do not simply survive in Baikal, they are Baikal, their bodies built atom by atom from its water, their evolutionary history inseparable from the lake's own geological story, so deeply woven into its chemistry and rhythm that removing them from the equation would be less like losing individual species and more like erasing chapters from a manuscript written across tens of millions of years. What makes Baikal uniquely haunting among the world's great natural wonders is precisely this layering, a place where geology, biology, and deep time have braided together so completely that the lake feels less like a geographical feature and more like a living archive, a testament written in cold water and strange flesh to the sheer improbable persistence of life. Scientists who study Baikal often describe a specific moment of disorientation, standing at the shore, looking out across water so clear it shows the bottom as easily as glass, and suddenly feeling the full weight of what lies beneath. Not just depth in the physical sense, but depth in time, in complexity, in consequence, as if the lake were quietly asking whether the human mind is truly large enough to hold it. And so Baikal sits at the center of its vast Siberian silence, neither asking for attention nor requiring it, simply continuing, its water cycling through the deep currents that take centuries to complete a single circuit. Its ancient life going about the business of ancient living, the NERPA breathing, the Golomayanka dissolving, the amphipods scouring the darkness, all of it an ongoing conversation between the planet and itself that was old long before anyone was listening. And yet, for all its ancient indifference, Baikal is changing, not slowly in geological terms, but rapidly in human ones, with water temperatures rising measurably decade by decade and algae blooms creeping across shores that remained pristine for millennia, green where there was never green before. The algae in question, Spirogyra, arrives not as a natural succession but as a signal, feeding on phosphorus and nitrogen carried down from surrounding settlements, thriving in warming shallows that once belonged exclusively to Baikal's extraordinary endemic sponge colonies, which are now bleaching and dying in visible patches. Those sponges matter more than most people realize, because they function as the lake's living filtration system, processing millions of liters of water daily. And when they die, the clarity that scientists and travelers have always treated as Baikal's defining characteristic begins, almost imperceptibly, then suddenly, to cloud. Clarity is not merely aesthetic here, it is biological infrastructure, the condition under which Baikal's entire food web was built, with sunlight penetrating to extraordinary depths and fueling a photosynthetic community that supports every tier of life above it, from the smallest diatom to the NERPA sleeping on winter ice. The NERPA themselves have become a kind of living barometer for the lake's health, their population fluctuating with ice cover, which in turn fluctuates with temperature, creating a chain of consequence so tightly linked that a warmer winter in Siberia ripples directly into pup survival rates the following spring. Russia designated Baikal a specially protected natural zone decades ago, and UNESCO recognized it as a World Heritage Site in 1996. And yet the bureaucratic architecture of protection has always struggled to keep pace with the real-world pressures of industry, agriculture, and a regional economy that has historically treated the lake as a resource rather than a responsibility. A pulp and paper mill operated on Baikal's southern shore for nearly half a century, discharging treated, and sometimes inadequately treated effluent directly into the watershed, and though it finally closed in 2013, the sediments it left behind continue to leach compounds into the water, a slow inheritance of industrial time written into the lakebed itself. What makes conservation at Baikal uniquely difficult is scale. Protecting a body of water this vast requires coordinating policy across an entire drainage basin the size of Western Europe, managing land use in watersheds that feed Baikal's tributaries hundreds of kilometers from the shore, an exercise in governance that demands long thinking in a world that rarely rewards it. Scientists from dozens of countries continue to work here, drawn not only by what Baikal is but by what it represents, a natural laboratory with no equal on Earth, where evolutionary processes that everywhere else remain theoretical can be observed in living, swimming, breathing detail, a place where the deep past is still alive and still asking questions. To stand at Baikal in the last light of a Siberian evening, when the surface holds the sky like a second sky and the far shore dissolves into distance, is to feel the particular vertigo of encountering something that genuinely exceeds your frame of reference, and to understand, with quiet certainty, that some places on this earth are not wonders because we decided to call them that, but because they simply, undeniably, are. And perhaps that is the final lesson Baikal offers, not a fact to be memorized, but a feeling to be carried, that the earth is older and stranger and more generous than we tend to remember, and that it has been quietly building miracles long before we arrived to name them. There are lakes on every continent, bodies of water that glitter on maps and fill with rain and serve their surrounding landscapes faithfully, but Baikal belongs to a different category entirely, one that has no other members, a singular thing wearing the word lake only because no better word exists. The Baikal seal, the omul, the translucent amphipods drifting through lightless water a kilometer below the surface, they did not evolve to impress us, and they do not need our wonder to continue their ancient work. Yet our wonder is the most honest response we have. What endures, long after the statistics fade and the documentary ends, is the image of that water, so clear it reads as something closer to air, so cold it aches, so deep that the bottom belongs to a geological age that predates almost everything familiar about the modern world. Baikal does not ask to be believed, it simply continues, freezing and thawing, deepening by fractions each century, holding its creatures and its silences and its impossible blue volume against the Siberian sky, the deepest lake on Earth, patiently outlasting every attempt to fully understand it. Thank you for watching. Stay grounded, stay hopeful, and look for the answers within.